Hello, my name is Aaron Balke, and today I want to show off my newest web application called webEMDR. webEMDR is a application in order to enable remote EMDR treatment. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing treatment. It's a therapeutic approach with the idea being that a small object or light source is moving across the screen or your field of view, and you have to watch it while you're processing trauma and all. And by doing that, you're activating your brain and not disassociating. And so that's, as far as I know, that's how it works. Feel free to research it more if you're interested. But the client I had, the therapy provider I was building this for, was wanting a application that allowed them to do it remotely with clients over Zoom or Simple Practice, I believe, is what is the HIPAA compliant version of Zoom. You're able to do therapy remotely. And so the therapist provider wanted to be able to control the web app on the client side, on their user side. They want to control if the little eye movement thing is moving back and forth. They want to control the speed of that. They wanted to keep count of how many cycles there were that the little object was moving across. And so that was the business goals of the project. For me personally, this was my first React app. This was my first Node.js app, my introduction to Redis. And also first time using Tailwind. So that was all very exciting. Before this, I had built a web app, but it was built just using raw JavaScript, HTML, CSS. It did not have any framework involved, and it used a Flask backend, so very rudimentary and very basic. If you want to check that out, it's called Jot. I will leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. But yeah, this was the first time using React and Node, all that good stuff. And I guess I'll just show it off here right now. So for demonstration purposes, we will pretend that these are two separate machines. The left-hand side is the therapist and their view and administration controls. And then the right-hand side is the client, so the person receiving the EMDR therapy. And so on therapist side, they will go therapist login. Then this will bring up all the admin controls. And so first thing will be the passcode. So they go and they share this passcode with the user, the person receiving the therapy. So that gets sent, and then the user pastes it into their side. So that gets put in there. That'll bring them to this page, the user page to receive the therapy, and in the center here is that little object that moves to do the EMDR therapy. On the left hand side, the administrator or therapist will then be able to control if the EMDR is taking place or not. So that's just the pause button here. So when they click that, it will begin bouncing the ball on their side, but also on the user side. So they're able to control if it's on. They're able to control the speed. So if they want it to be moving faster, they're able to increase the speed. And there we go. Start bouncing that one like crazy. Each cycle is counted, so they're able to keep track of how many times it's been running. So you can count 25, 50 times while they're reprocessing trauma and all. If the code doesn't end up working, you are able to refresh. You'll create a random code for the session and send that to the database. So you're able to just flip around. You're able to exit on both sides. And that is how it works. This was my first time using React, and was mostly using, I don't actually believe I used any React classes. I believe they were all functions and components. It was quite the learning curve to use state and use effect. I am hoping in the future to perhaps start learning some state management tools like Redux and all. I did end up using Vite as the React framework, The reason I used Vite is this was going to be a fairly basic React website, and it was just going to be a single page application. And so I didn't feel that something like Next.js would be necessary. Vite would cover everything I needed, so that's why I went with. This was the first time I used Tailwind, and to be honest with you, out of all of the new stuff I learned in order to make this, Tailwind is probably my favorite. I really enjoy having the CSS right there on the HTML and not having to go hunting for a class in the CSS file. That was something that was bogging me down like crazy in my No Framework version, or in my Jot app, the No Framework app I built. And being able to immediately adjust the CSS just made things so much easier to troubleshoot and work with. It sounds like most of the dissent against Tailwind comes from people who already knew CSS, and I did not know CSS that well. I mostly was just looking up stuff on the Jot app when I was doing the No Framework, and so I didn't have a bunch of things I already knew running into things I was learning, if that makes sense. So I'm a big fan of Tailwind. It did, I believe, use post CSS by default. I believe Vite automatically uses post CSS, or Tailwind does to clear out the extra classes. I didn't have anything to do with that, but I believe post CSS was used in this app. For the backend, I did use Node.js with Express. It wasn't going to be that crazy of a backend, and in all honesty, all what it was doing was attaching the front end, the React front end, to the Redis backend database. And there was no static files being sent from Node.js to the front end. It was just connecting the front end to the Redis database. And the reason for using the Redis database in order to store stuff was because the only stuff being stored is the session ID, so that's the number the therapist creates here, the speed of the EMDR therapy, and if it's being paused or played at the time. That's the only information being shared between sessions. And so there's no real relational component of the database, because all what you're doing is pulling the session ID and then pulling the information for that session ID at that time that's being pulled. And so there is no, you don't need to have a relation there. You just really need a key value pair, which Redis is perfect for. And it's in the memory, which there's no reason, we don't need persistence when it comes to this database, because as soon as the session's over, you can clear out the entire data. You can clear out that session being stored once the session's over. And speed was also important when it came to the Redis database, because we are sending state between clients. And so we didn't want to get bogged down with a MySQL database, which would be slower and not applicable in this use case. I did try running SQLite inside the Node.js backend, running in the memory. The problem with that, it worked perfectly fine on the local machine and was able to run it without a problem. The problem occurred when I tried pushing that to Vercel, because all of this is running as serverless functions, and the serverless functions did not work well with a SQLite database inside the Node.js backend running. It just did not like that. So I did have to end up doing the Redis, and I do think that's a better solution overall. But I did mess around with SQLite beforehand, so just wanted to throw that out there and why we had to switch that around. One important thing to mention is how the session information is being shared with the client during the therapy session. If you're the one receiving the therapy, how is the state over on the therapist side being sent to the user? And the way that's being done is the therapist, every time they change the state of the speed, the pause versus play, and the session code, that information is being sent to the Redis database and updating the key value pairs for that session, or creating a new key value pair. Then it's being stored on the Redis database. And then the weird, and I'm not sure if this is the right way to do it, but the way the user is getting that information, the update information, is every couple of seconds it's pulling the server for new information. And so nothing's visible right now, but every 1 to 2 seconds it's pulling the database for that information. And if things haven't changed, nothing changes. But if something does change when it pulls that information, then it changes the CSS, that animates the CSS here to make the ball bounce back and forth. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. I need to look into web sockets more. I believe web sockets would be the best way to do this, or at least a better alternative, because right now the problem is every 1 to 2 seconds it's pulling and requesting information from the database. So that's just a lot of requests. If you run this for an hour, you've pulled the database 3,600 times. And so I believe a WebSocket would be a better way of doing this. I just am not familiar enough with WebSockets. And so that is something in the future I want to learn, is WebSockets, how those work, and maybe even come back and fix this, make it not pull every 1 to 2 seconds, do a WebSocket instead. I'll need to do more research on that. But right now it's just pulling it's using a set timeout in order to, it waits for the last request to be completed, and then it waits 1 to 2 seconds, requests again, 1 to 2 seconds, requests again. Another important thing that I learned was how important state is when it comes to React components. I had no clue what state was before this project, and it is a big deal. I did not realize how big of a deal it was. So I am hoping to learn Redux or perhaps another state management option. Maybe even, I believe it's React Query, which would be good for the database stuff. I am using UseEffect quite a lot, and it sounds like React Query would be a better option than that. I need to do more research on that. So that's something I'm going to be looking into more. Another miscellaneous thing that this project really pushed me into using was ternary operators and modulus, remainder operators. The ternary one was very useful for choosing which React components to show and which CSS to show for the different options. And so whenever the state changes, that would change CSS, that would change which component is being shown, and ternary operators are super good for Boolean flipping the components in the CSS. And so I really got into using ternary, got really comfortable with those. Modulus was also helpful, just if something's even or with the speed, that was really easy to set the CSS based on the 4 different speeds. You're able to change the CSS of the ball bouncing, so the speed of the animation. That was also a wild thing. This was my first time doing like full-on CSS animations, and trying to do it in Tailwind was wild. Trying to learn CSS animations in Tailwind is pretty fun. All right, that was exciting. So was able to get that figured out, but that was fun. When it comes to security, these session IDs are created randomly, and then you just share those directly with the client. It is possible for another user to hop into another person's EMDR session. However, there isn't any information like PHI, PII being shared over or to the web application or over the web application. So there's no username, password, anything like that. The only information you could gather from the web app is the passcode, if currently the animation is playing, and at what speed the animation is playing. So there's nothing security-wise that's a problem when it comes to this. I guess overall, React still need to get more comfortable with, excited to keep on messing around with it. Tailwind, massive fan of. Node.js, a pretty big fan of. I'm pretty much, it's about equal with Flask for me. I'm just as comfortable with Flask as I am with Node.js and Express. Redis, for this use case, I think it's perfect. I'm going to use Redis for these sorts of things every time over a relational database. I didn't understand the purpose of a document-based database like Redis or MongoDB until doing this. And so being able to see the use case for a certain technology was super useful, and being able to implement it. Massive fan of Redis. And Yeah, I'm really digging the web application stuff. If you're interested in checking out this program, this web application, it is at web-emdr.vercel.app. I will leave a link in the description for you to check it out. I'll also leave a link in the description to the GitHub if you want to go check that out and see all the code, all the good stuff. And yeah, that is webEMDR, my web application built using React, Node.js Express, Tailwind, and Redis as the database. If you're interested in more stuff like this, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out the GitHub, check out the application itself, and have a good one.